A sophisticated woman watches her life of power crumble in the middle of nowhere. Her motorcycle breaks down at the worst possible moment, and a stranger emerges from the highway's heat haze. She just wanted to fix her bike, but she discovers she's about to destroy an entire town. Now every wrong step could cost her much more than her career. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tell us what city you're watching from. And now, on with the story. The dirt road stretched out like a red scar cutting through the rural Texas landscape. Dust rose in thick clouds every time a vehicle passed, covering the low-lying vegetation with an orange film that seemed part of the scenery. The smell of dry earth mixed with the aroma of mesquite and sun-baked grass filled the air, bringing with it that nostalgic feeling of the countryside, of slower times, of a simpler life. It was one of those hot March mornings when the sun hadn't yet reached its peak, but was already announcing a scorching day, with heat shimmering over the asphalt and turning the horizon into liquid waves of warm air. Megan Foster gunned her imported motorcycle down the road, the engine purring smoothly as she navigated the treacherous curves, her eyes fixed on the GPS that kept insisting on recalculating the route. Every 2 minutes, the automated voice announced a new direction, contradicting the previous one, leaving her increasingly frustrated. She was late, very late, terribly, disastrously late. The meeting with her father, Edward Foster, was scheduled for 10 in the morning in Abilene, and it was already past 9. At least another hour on the road ahead, maybe more, considering the GPS clearly wasn't helping at all. Every minute lost. On this damn road was another argument he would use against her, more ammunition for the endless arsenal of criticism he saved especially for moments when she needed to prove her worth. Megan could picture the prepared speech, that condescending tone he loved to use, the expression of feigned but calculated disappointment he reserved for her failures. "A woman doesn't have the nerve for business," he would say, shaking his head as if lamenting an inevitable universal truth. "A woman gets lost on the way. A woman can't even get to a crucial meeting on time. How can I entrust the management of a $50 million project to someone who can't even find her way to a small town?" She knew every word, every intonation, every disapproving glance. She had rehearsed defenses in her head for weeks, but she knew no excuse would be good enough. For Edward Foster, you were either up to the task or you were out. There was no middle ground, no second chance. The motorcycle's engine started making a strange noise. First, it was an almost imperceptible ticking, which Megan tried to ignore, attributing it to the uneven terrain. But then the sound morphed into something more worrying, a metallic grinding that made her stomach sink. Megan frowned, slowing down, her heart starting to beat faster. No, she thought. It can't be. Not today, not now. Not when she had so much at stake, when her professional future depended on this single meeting. But the universe seemed to have other plans, as if it had conspired especially against her on this all-important day. Thick white smoke began to pour from the engine, followed by a strong, nauseating smell of burning oil that invaded her nostrils and made her eyes sting. In a few seconds, the bike lost power completely, the engine sputtering and coughing, refusing to respond to her desperate commands. Megan had to pull over onto the rough shoulder, the tire hitting loose gravel, almost losing her balance. She stopped the bike with a jolt, planting both feet on the ground to steady herself, quietly cursing every word she knew as she took off her helmet, with hands trembling from frustration and anger. There she was, Megan Foster, an executive at one of the state's largest development corporations, a project manager with 2 MBAs and a flawless resume, stuck in the middle of nowhere, completely lost on a dirt road in rural Texas that barely even showed up on the map. She was sweating profusely inside the Italian tailored pantsuit she had so carefully chosen the night before, spending a full hour deciding between navy blue and charcoal gray, finally opting for the blue because it seemed more authoritative, more serious, more worthy of respect. Now the suit was stuck to her back, stained with sweat, wrinkled, ridiculous. The 4-inch heels that were supposed to convey authority and presence now seemed like the most absurdly inappropriate choice in the world. How was she supposed to walk in those if she needed to ask for help? How could anyone take her seriously dressed like this, perched, out of place, clearly out of her element? She pulled her phone from her suit pants pocket, her hands still shaking slightly. The screen showed a signal bar so weak it was practically non-existent. No service, of course, because technology, that modern marvel she blindly trusted every day, always failed at the worst possible moments. All those promises of universal connectivity, of always being available, of solving problems from a distance with a tap on the screen, all of it crumbled, completely when you really needed it. Megan looked around, trying to assess her options, which were discouragingly limited. The road was deserted, completely empty in both directions. Only the irritating buzz of cicadas filled the heavy morning silence and the shimmering heat rising from the cracked asphalt, distorting her vision and making the horizon dance like a mirage. Across the road, about 200 yards away, she could see a small building half hidden behind some trees. Maybe it was a house, maybe an abandoned store, hard to tell from that distance. There weren't many options. In fact, there were no options at all. She was about to start walking in those impossible heels, mentally rehearsing how to ask for help without sounding like a lost and desperate executive, when she heard the familiar rumble of a diesel engine slowly approaching. An old pickup truck, probably a 90s model, with its blue paint faded by the relentless Texas sun and a rusty bumper held on with wire, came around the bend. The vehicle gradually slowed down and stopped right beside her, the diesel engine knocking with that irregular rhythm characteristic of a well-traveled vehicle. From the driver's side, a man got out with agile, practical movements. He must have been in his early 40s, maybe 45, his skin tanned and weathered by the sun from working outdoors. A faded plaid shirt with the sleeves carefully rolled up to his elbows, revealing muscular forearms accustomed to hard work. There was an expression on his face that mixed genuine curiosity and sincere concern, without a trace of judgment or suspicion. Rob Miller looked first at the imported motorcycle, a model he had probably never seen in person but recognized from magazines, then at the woman in the impeccable suit and high heels standing beside it with an expression that wavered between frustration and desperation, and he didn't need much to understand the situation completely. He had grown up on these roads, knew every pothole, every dangerous curve. He had stopped dozens of times to help drivers in trouble. It was part of the culture of the region, helping those in need. It wasn't heroism or a search for recognition. It was simply what you did. "Need a hand, ma'am?" he asked in a calm, deep voice, already approaching the motorcycle with sure, confident steps, like someone who knows exactly what they're doing. Megan hesitated for a brief moment, all the safety warnings her mother had given her over the years echoing in her head. Don't accept rides from strangers. Don't trust unknown people in isolated places. Always keep a safe distance. But those rules were for the big city, for Dallas with its millions of anonymous inhabitants. Here in this remote countryside, the rules seemed different. There was something in the man's posture, in the way he looked at her without any ulterior motives, just with that genuine concern of someone who sees a person in trouble and wants to help, that made her relax slightly. She wasn't used to accepting help from strangers, especially not from men she didn't know on deserted, isolated roads. Her entire career had been built on independence, on never needing anyone, on solving her own problems. But the circumstances didn't leave much room for pride or principles. She glanced at her wristwatch, a Rolex her father had given her when she was promoted. 9:15. The meeting was definitely lost, but maybe there was still time to minimize the disaster. If she could get there soon, if she could communicate, if she could come up with a convincing excuse. The bike broke down, she said, trying to maintain a professional and controlled tone, as if she were in a business meeting and not stranded on the shoulder of a dirt road. "Do you happen to know a mechanic in the area?" Rob smiled slightly, the kind of discreet smile of someone who knows something the other person doesn't. "I do, ma'am. That'd be me. I have a garage in Cedar Springs, about 10 miles from here on the main road. I can take a look if you'd like. But from the smell and the amount of smoke, you're gonna need some new parts. It's not a simple fix. Nothing I can do here on the side of the road with basic tools, no, ma'am." Cedar Springs. The name echoed in Megan's mind like a distant bell. She knew that name. Of course she did. It was the exact town where the factory was going to be built, the center of the entire project she had been managing for months, the same town she was supposed to have visited that day right after the meeting in Abilene to do the initial site survey, talk to the city council and assess the local infrastructure. Fate had a peculiar and cruel sense of humor. Of all the small towns in Texas where her motorcycle could break down, it had to be this one. As if the universe were forcing her to face something she had planned to do in a controlled, scheduled, professional manner. She looked again at the bike, then at the old but apparently reliable pickup, and finally at the man in front of her, and realized she really didn't have much of a choice. "Can you take me to your garage? I'll pay for the service, of course, and for towing the bike." Rob nodded. "No problem. I'll tie the bike down in the bed and give you a lift, but it's going to take some time. These imported bikes are tricky. I don't always have the parts. Might take a few days." Days? Megan felt panic rise in her throat. She didn't have days. She had hours, at most. But arguing wouldn't solve anything. She helped Rob push the bike onto the back of the pickup, noticing how he did everything with a practical efficiency, unhurried but without wasting time. There was something comforting in those sure movements, in the way he checked the knots on the ropes, making sure everything was secure. It was a different kind of competence than what she was used to seeing in boardrooms, a competence built with hands, with real experience, not with spreadsheets and presentations. When they finally got into the cab of the truck, Megan noticed a backpack on the back seat with school books peeking out of the opening. Rob noticed her glance and explained, "My daughter's. She forgot her backpack this morning. I was on my way back from dropping her off at school when I saw you on the road. Lucky for you, I came this way." Lucky. Megan wasn't sure if that was the right word, but she didn't know what would be. The truck started moving, bouncing over the potholes in the dirt road. She tried her phone again. Still no service. She was completely disconnected from the corporate world, trapped in a situation that seemed like something out of a bad movie. And the worst part was that, somewhere in her mind, a part of her felt a strange sense of relief. Not having to face her father right now, not having to defend her. Competence once again. Not having to pretend everything was under control when, in fact, she had barely slept in recent weeks thinking about this project. "You from Dallas?" Rob asked, breaking the silence. "Yes, came out here for some business in Abilene." "Business," he repeated, with a tone that wasn't exactly judgmental but one of recognition. "Lot of outsiders coming through here lately. They say there's going to be a new factory in Cedar Springs. Big deal, from what I hear." Megan tensed up. "Yeah, I heard something about that." Rob nodded, keeping his eyes on the road. "Don't know if it's such a good idea. Town's small, everyone knows everyone. My daughter was born here, grew up here. It's not much, but it's ours. When they start talking about progress and development, it usually means someone's going to lose something. It's always like that." She didn't answer. How could she? She was the person responsible for that project. She was the one who had spent months analyzing demographic data, economic feasibility, environmental impact. On paper, it all made sense. A factory would bring jobs, development, tax revenue for the town. But here, sitting in this old pickup, listening to a mechanic talk about his town like he was talking about his home. For the first time, Megan wondered what exactly those reports didn't show. Who were the people who lived here? What would they lose? And why had she never asked those questions before? The town of Cedar Springs appeared gradually. First a few scattered houses, then paved but narrow streets, small shops with simple storefronts. It had that small town feel where everyone knows everyone, where people still chat on the sidewalk and dogs sleep in the middle of the street without fear of being run over. Rob turned onto a side street and parked in front of a single-story building with a faded sign, Miller's Garage, General Repairs. It was humble, no doubt. Tools hanging on the walls, the smell of oil and grease in the air, the floor stained from decades of work. But there was order in the chaos. Everything in its place, every tool within reach. Megan got out of the truck, still processing where she was and how her morning had taken this unexpected turn. Rob started untying the motorcycle, and she took the opportunity to try her phone again. A faint sliver of a signal. She quickly typed a message to her assistant. Had a problem, can't make it, need to reschedule, emergency. The reply came almost instantly. Your father is furious, wants to talk to you ASAP. Of course he was furious. Edward Foster didn't tolerate unforeseen events, especially from someone he already considered a risk to the company for the simple fact of being a woman. This meeting was for Megan to prove she could lead the factory project, that she had what it took to make tough decisions and manage large investments. Missing the meeting was like confirming all his prejudices. She put her phone away, feeling the weight of the situation. There was no way to reverse this now. She would have to deal with the consequences later. Rob had already moved the bike into the garage and was examining the engine closely. Megan walked in, her high heels echoing on the concrete floor. She felt out of place, a corporate figure in a world that operated by completely different rules. And then she heard a young voice coming from the back of the garage. "Dad, I forgot my backpack again." A girl of about 16 appeared wearing a school uniform. She was thin, with her hair in a messy ponytail, lively eyes, and an expression of someone who was always thinking about 1,000 things at once. She stopped when she saw Megan, clearly surprised by the presence of a woman in a suit in her father's garage. Rob smiled, grabbing the backpack from the truck seat. "I was just bringing it to you. Becca, this is—" He looked at Megan, realizing he didn't know her name. "Megan," she completed, extending her hand to the girl. "Megan Foster. My bike broke down on the road and your dad is helping me out." Becca shook her hand, her eyes examining Megan with intense curiosity. "Cool. Where are you from? Dallas? What are you doing here in Cedar Springs?" The question was innocent, but it touched a nerve. Megan hesitated. "I'm here. For some business. Nothing major." Becca seemed to accept the answer, but there was an intelligence in those eyes that suggested she perceived more than she let on. She took the backpack from her father's hands and glanced at the clock. "I gotta run. Math test in 15 minutes. Are you going to be around?" she asked Megan. "I don't know. Yet. Depends on how long the repair takes," Rob intervened. "It'll take at least 2 days, Becca. I need to order parts from Abilene. If I can order them today, they'll get here tomorrow. Best case scenario, it's ready the day after tomorrow." 2 days. Megan closed her eyes. 2 days stuck in Cedar Springs. 2 days away from the office, from the reports, from her father's demands. 2 days in a town she was supposed to be studying from a distance, through numbers and charts, not experiencing up close. But maybe this was exactly what she needed. Maybe it was an opportunity to see with her own eyes what this project really meant, to meet the people who would be affected, to understand what the reports didn't tell. Or maybe she was just trying to find a silver lining in a terrible situation. Hard to say. "Is there a hotel in town?" she asked, already expecting the answer. Rob and Becca exchanged a look. "There's the Cedar Springs Inn," he said. "It's simple, but it's clean. It's near the town square. I can give you a ride there if you want." Megan thanked him, while Rob finished examining the bike, making notes in an old notebook. Becca stood there watching Megan with that teenage curiosity mixed with something else. There were unasked questions in her eyes, a tension Megan couldn't quite identify. And then the girl spoke, with a sincerity that caught her off guard. "You work with that factory they're going to build here, don't you?" Megan froze. "How do you know that?" "Everyone knows. It's a small town. News travels fast. And you're dressed just like the people who showed up here last month, taking measurements, snapping pictures, talking to the mayor." Becca crossed her arms. "My dad doesn't know yet, but they're going to tear down our house. It's right where they say the factory is going to be built." The silence that followed was heavy. Rob looked at his daughter with an expression of someone who hadn't known that information, and then at Megan, processing what it meant. Megan felt the ground give way beneath her. This wasn't just a town on a map. This was their home, and she was the person responsible for taking it from them. "Are you enjoying this story? Tell me your opinion on it and how you think it will end." Becca's revelation echoed in the garage like thunder on a clear day, reverberating off the oil-stained walls and hanging tools, carrying a weight that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Megan felt the blood run cold in her veins, a physical sensation of chill creeping up her spine despite the day's heat. Rob dropped the tool he was holding, the metallic clang echoing like a definitive period at the end of a sentence. The wrench rolled across the uneven floor and stopped at Megan's feet, a silent accusation. He looked at his daughter with a complex expression that mixed genuine surprise, deep confusion, and a growing pang of fear he tried to hide but failed miserably. His hands, always so steady when holding tools, began to tremble slightly. "What do you mean, Becca? What are you talking about? Tear down our house?" His voice came out louder than he intended, laced with an emotion rarely seen in Rob. "How long have you known this? Why the hell didn't you tell me anything before?" The girl sighed, a heavy, weary sigh that shouldn't belong to someone just 16. It was the sigh of someone already, carrying adult burdens, who had learned too early that the world wasn't always fair or kind. "I've known for 2 weeks, Dad. 2 weeks keeping it to myself, afraid to tell you, afraid of how you'd react. I overheard Mrs. Martha talking to Mr. Jenkins at the bakery that morning. I went to get bread for breakfast. They were in line talking low but not low enough, worried, scared even. They got an official notice from the city, a letter with a real letterhead. It says the area where we live, our whole street, is going to be seized for industrial construction. Everyone on the street has to leave, everyone, Dad. 32 families, 32 houses, over 100 people. People we've known forever." Rob ran a hand over his face, processing the information. "And you didn't tell me anything?" Becca looked down. "I didn't want to worry you. You already work so hard, you have so much on your mind. I thought maybe it was just a rumor, that it wouldn't really happen. But then more outsiders started showing up, with clipboards, cameras, asking questions. And today she shows up here," she pointed at Megan, "dressed exactly like those people. It's not a coincidence." Megan felt the weight of 2 pairs of eyes on her. The accusation wasn't just in Becca's words, but in Rob's silence, in the way he looked at her now. No longer as someone who needed help, but as someone who represented a threat. She opened her mouth to respond, but what could she say? Denying it was pointless. Lying would be worse, so she chose the only thing she had left at that moment: the truth. "It's true," Megan admitted, her voice coming out weaker than she'd like. "I work for Foster Development. I'm the project manager for the new factory. But I didn't know, I swear I didn't know your house was in the way. The reports, the maps, it was all just data, numbers, geographic coordinates. I never—" She paused, searching for the right words. "I never stopped to think that behind those numbers were people, families, stories." Rob took a step back, as if her proximity had suddenly become toxic. "You work for the company that's going to destroy my home, the house where my daughter was born, where my wife lived before she left, and you're telling me you didn't know. How is that possible?" Megan swallowed hard. The guilt weighed on her chest like a stone. "Because I never came here. Because I did my job from a distance, in an air-conditioned office, looking at spreadsheets and charts. Because it's easier to make tough decisions when you don't know the faces of the people who will be affected." Silence once again dominated the garage. Becca looked at her father, waiting for his reaction. Rob looked at Megan, as if trying to decide between anger and disappointment. Finally he sighed, picked up the tool from the floor and went back to the motorcycle. "I'll fix your bike, it's my job. But don't expect me to be friendly with you, and if I were you, I'd find another place to stay. The Cedar Springs Inn is owned by the mayor's brother-in-law. When they find out who you are, you might not be welcome." Megan felt tears welling up but held them back. She didn't have the right to cry. Not now. Not here. She thanked him quietly, grabbed her small travel bag from the bike, and left the garage, feeling the weight of Becca's gaze on her back. The street was empty, just a few people walking in the distance, living their lives without knowing that an executive from Dallas was there to change them forever. She walked aimlessly for a few minutes, trying to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. The missed meeting, the broken-down bike, Becca's revelation. It was as if the universe was forcing her to confront something she had avoided all along, the human reality behind her reports. She passed by the central square of Cedar Springs, where old men played dominoes under the shade of trees. Children ran with colorful kites and women chatted, on benches laughing at jokes only they understood. Everything was so simple, so everyday, so full of life, and she was there to end it, to turn this place into a construction site, into concrete and steel, into profit and development. But development for whom? And at what cost? Her phone vibrated in her pocket. A call from her father. She looked at the name on the screen and, for the first time in her professional life, hit reject. She wasn't ready for that conversation. Not now. Maybe she never would be. She kept walking until she found the Cedar, Springs Inn. It was a 2-story building painted a faded yellow with a wooden sign hanging at the entrance. She went in and was greeted by a smiling, talkative, middle-aged woman. "Good afternoon. Looking for a room?" The woman looked her up and down, clearly curious about this visitor who was so different from the usual. "Yes," Megan replied. "For 2 days, maybe 3. The woman took out an old notebook to register her. "Full name?" "Megan Foster, from Dallas." "Oh, a city girl. Nice to have folks from out of town visiting our little town. Are you here for work or pleasure?" The question was innocent, but Megan felt its weight. "Work," she replied vaguely, hoping she wouldn't have to give more details. The innkeeper led her to a room on the 2nd floor. It was simple, with a single bed, a dark wood wardrobe, and a window overlooking the main street. But it was clean, smelled of lavender, and had a tranquility Megan hadn't felt in months. She thanked her, closed the door, and finally allowed herself to break down. She sat on the bed and let the tears come. She cried for the situation, for the confusion, for the guilt she didn't know how to carry. She cried because, for the first time, she was seeing the real consequences of her corporate decisions, and she cried because she didn't know how to fix it. She didn't know if it was possible to fix. After a while, she got up, washed her face, and decided that crying wouldn't solve anything. She needed to act. She needed to understand the situation better. She took her laptop from her bag and turned it on, connecting to the inn's weak Wi-Fi. She opened the factory project files and began to review. Everything with a new perspective. The maps, the coordinates, the impact studies, there it was marked in red. Residential area to be acquired. 32 houses. 107 estimated residents. Planned financial compensation. Market value plus 20%. But what did market value mean in a small town where houses weren't just properties, but homes built over generations? How much was the house where Rob raised his daughter alone worth? How much was the memory of the wife who had left worth? How much were the roots, the neighbors, the community worth? No financial value could compensate for that. She kept reading. The project planned for the factory's construction in that specific area because it was flat, had easy access to the main highway, and was close to the town center, facilitating logistics. But there was a note in small print, almost invisible, that she had never noticed before. Alternative B, abandoned industrial site on the east side, requires further feasibility study. Megan frowned. There was an alternative. Why hadn't this alternative been seriously considered? She searched the files and found a brief 3-page report, dismissing the option due to additional costs for site cleanup and renovation of existing infrastructure. The report was signed by Henry Bishop, Director of Planning and her father's right-hand man, a man she had never fully trusted, but had never openly questioned. Something didn't add up. Why so quickly dismiss an alternative that could avoid the displacement of over 100 people? Megan picked up her phone and called Julia, her assistant in Dallas. Julia was efficient, discreet, and had access to files that didn't always go through official channels. "Julia, I need you to do me a favor. Discreetly. I want all the reports on the site selection for the Cedar Springs factory. All of them, including the preliminary ones, the rejected proposals, and any internal communication on the matter." Julia hesitated on the other end of the line. "Megan, your father is looking for you desperately. He said if I spoke to you, I should tell you you're suspended until further notice." Megan sighed. "I know, and I'll deal with that. But first, I need those documents. Can you email them to me?" Julia agreed, albeit reluctantly. "I'll see what I can do. But be careful, Megan. Your father is furious, and when he gets like this, he doesn't usually forgive." The call ended, and Megan stared at the laptop screen, waiting for the files to arrive. Meanwhile, she thought about Rob and Becca. She thought about the anger in his eyes, the disappointment in the girl's voice. She thought about how easy it had been to plan this project from afar, without ever considering that each number represented a life. And she thought about how, perhaps for the first time in her career, she was asking the right questions, not about profit or efficiency, but about justice and humanity. Julia's email arrived half an hour later, each minute of waiting feeling like an eternity. Megan opened the message with anxious hands, her heart beating faster. There were dozens of compressed files, technical reports, preliminary studies, meeting minutes, rejected proposals, internal communications that should never have left the company. Julia had risked a lot to get this, probably violating several security and confidentiality protocols. If discovered, she would be fired immediately and possibly sued. But she had done it anyway, trusting Megan, believing there was something bigger at stake. Megan began to read meticulously, one file at a time, taking detailed notes in an old notebook she had found at the inn, underlining important passages, circling suspicious dates, drawing lines connecting seemingly unrelated information. She worked like a detective, assembling a complex puzzle, each piece revealing a little more of the complete picture. And the more she read, cross-referencing information between different documents, comparing dates and signatures, the more a suspicion grew in her mind like a spreading oil slick. The choice of the site had not been merely technical or based on objective criteria. It had been political from the start, calculated, manipulated, and worse, it had been deeply self-serving and corrupt. The land where Rob, Becca, and their neighbors lived belonged to the city. It had been donated years ago by a traditional local family for the construction of affordable housing. But a recent ordinance, signed by the mayor, had reclassified the area as being of industrial interest, allowing its sale or lease to private companies. And guess who had close political connections with the mayor of Cedar Springs? Henry Bishop, director of planning at Foster Development. The same man who had quickly dismissed the alternative of the abandoned site. Megan felt anger rise in her throat. She had been used. The entire project had been manipulated to benefit political and personal interests, and she, naive, had believed she was doing a technical, impartial, professional job. Not at all. She was just a pawn in a much larger and much dirtier game than she had imagined. She closed the laptop and looked out the window. The afternoon was falling over Cedar Springs, painting the sky in orange hues. People were starting to return home, greeting each other on the sidewalks, stopping to chat, sharing their day. It was such a common, such a banal scene, but at the same time so precious. It was life happening. It was community. It was everything she had forgotten existed while climbing the corporate ladder. Megan made a decision. She wasn't going to let this happen. She wasn't going to allow Rob, Becca, and all the other residents to be removed from their homes because of a political scheme. She wasn't going to be an accomplice to that, but to fight against Henry and possibly her own father, she would need proof. She would need allies. And above all, she would need the courage to face the consequences. Because challenging Edward Foster wasn't just risky for her career, it was risking everything. She grabbed a jacket and left the inn. The sun was setting and she knew exactly where she needed to go. Back to the garage, back to talk to Rob and Becca, back to, perhaps for the first time in her life, do the right thing, even if it meant destroying everything she had built so far. When she arrived at Miller's garage, the lights were on, and she could see Rob working on the bike through the open door. He saw her approach and stopped, his expression cautious. Megan took a deep breath and walked in. "I know you have no reason to trust me. I know I represent everything that's wrong with this situation, but I need you to listen to me, because I think we've both been deceived, and I think I can prove it." Rob crossed his arms, skeptical, but he didn't send her away. Becca appeared from the back of the garage, still in her school uniform, books in hand. She looked at Megan with that same intensity as before, but now there was something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or hope. "Then talk," Rob said, "but choose your words carefully, because if you're here to offer us money, or try to convince us that losing our home is for the greater good, you can leave now." "I'm not here for that," Megan replied, her voice firm. "I'm here to tell you that the choice of this site was a fraud, and I'm here to propose that we fight together to change it." Megan's words hung in the garage air. Rob and Becca looked at her with expressions that mixed suspicion with a spark of something that might be hope. Megan opened her leather briefcase and took out her laptop, placing it on the oil-stained workbench. "Let me show something," she said, opening the files Julia had sent. "Here's the original project. You can see there were 3 site options for the factory. Option A was here," she pointed to the map on the screen, "where you live. Option B was an abandoned industrial site on the east side of town, and Option C was a rural area 10 miles from here." Rob moved closer, followed by Becca. They both stared at the screen intently. "So why did they choose Option A?" Becca asked, her voice laced with restrained anger. "Officially," Megan continued, flipping through the documents, "because it was the most economically viable option. Flat land close to the highway, existing urban infrastructure. But look at this." She opened another file, a technical report on Option B. "This abandoned site on the east side is from an old textile mill that closed 15 years ago. The building is run down, yes, but the basic structure is still sound. With some renovation and adaptation, it would be perfectly viable. And what's more," she paused for emphasis, "it wouldn't displace a single family from their homes. The additional cost would be about 15% more, but it's completely feasible, within the project's budget." "So why was it dismissed?" Rob asked, his voice tense. Megan showed him the report signed by Henry Bishop. "Because the company's director of planning, Henry Bishop, decided it wasn't a good idea, and I think I know why." She opened another file, a document Julia had managed to access through informal channels. It was a deed for the land where Rob lived. The land belonged to the city, but the ordinance allowing its sale for industrial purposes had been signed by the mayor 2 months before the project was officially announced. "And the most interesting part," Megan continued, "is that Henry Bishop is the mayor's cousin, a distant cousin but still family." Becca's eyes widened. "They set this up? They planned for the factory to be built here specifically?" Megan nodded. "I think so. I don't have definitive proof yet, but all the signs point to it. Your land was public, designated for affordable housing. Turning it into an industrial zone and selling it to a large corporation generates a substantial commission for the city, and probably for a few specific people who facilitated the process." Rob ran a hand over his face, processing the information. "Is that," he searched for the right word, "illegal?" "It depends," Megan answered honestly. "If it was done within legal procedures, technically no, but it's morally questionable and likely involves a conflict of interest. And if I can prove that the site selection wasn't technical, but based on personal favoritism, I can argue that the project must be revised. But," she paused, looking directly at Rob, "I'm going to need your help. I need to get to know the town, talk to the residents, understand the real impact this would have. I need stories, faces, real lives to counter the cold numbers in the reports." Rob took a step back. "You want me to help you? After everything? After you plan to destroy my home?" Megan felt the guilt tighten in her chest again. "I know I have no right to ask this. I know I was part of the problem. But now I want to be part of the solution, and I can't do this alone." Becca looked at her father, then at Megan. "I think we should give her a chance, Dad. If she's telling the truth, if there's really a scheme behind this, we need to expose it. It's not just about our house, it's 32 families, it's our neighbors, our friends, the people we've known forever." Rob sighed, clearly torn. He didn't trust easily. He'd been burned before, abandoned by the wife who once promised to stand by his side forever. Trusting an executive from Dallas who appeared out of nowhere went against every self-preservation instinct he had developed. But at the same time, he saw sincerity in Megan's eyes. He saw guilt, yes, but also determination. And if there was a chance, however small, to save his home and his community, he had to try. "All right," he said finally. "We'll try. But if you betray us, if we find out this is all some kind of ploy to gain our trust, I swear I'll do everything I can to expose you and your company." Understood? Megan nodded. Understood. And I won't betray you, I promise. In the following days, Megan immersed herself in a reality completely different from what she was used to. Becca, with her youthful energy and deep knowledge of the community, became her unofficial guide. The girl introduced Megan to every family that would be affected by the project. Mrs. Martha, the 73-year-old woman who had lived in the same house for 50 years, where she raised 6 children and now cared for 3 grandchildren. Mr. Jenkins, the baker who opened his shop at 4 in the morning every day for 3 decades, making the bread that fed the entire town. The Oliveira family with 4 young children who had finally managed to buy their house after years of saving. Each story was a blow to Megan's heart. Each face, each name, each shared memory was a painful reminder of how she had failed in her job. Not due to technical incompetence, but a lack of humanity. For never questioning if the numbers told the whole story. For passively accepting that development necessarily meant destruction. Rob, initially distant, began to open up as the days went by. One night, after Becca had gone to bed, he invited Megan for coffee in the small kitchen at the back of the garage. The place was humble, with a time-worn wooden table and mismatched chairs, but there was a warmth there that no luxury apartment in Dallas could ever have. He served strong coffee in old mugs and sat across from her. "You know why my wife left?" he asked suddenly. Megan shook her head, holding the warm mug between her hands. "She wanted more than I could give, more than this town could offer. She dreamed of the big city, of opportunities, of a different life. And I," he gave a sad smile, "I always wanted to stay here. Raise my daughter in a place where she knew everyone, where she was safe, where she had roots. We could never reconcile those 2 worlds. So she chose hers and left me with mine." "And you never thought about going after her?" Megan asked softly. He took a sip of coffee. "Every day, but not for me, for Becca. A child needs her mother, but over time I realized she needed a present father more than a mother who didn't want to be here. So I stayed, and I tried to be both. I don't know if I succeeded, but I tried." Megan felt tears welling up. Rob's story was raw, real, painful, and she was about to take away the one stable thing he had built for himself and his daughter. A home. "No," she thought. "I won't let that happen. I won't be another person who abandons them." Meanwhile, in Dallas, the situation was getting complicated. Edward Foster, furious about his daughter's disappearance and the missed meeting, had given an ultimatum through Julia. Megan had 48 hours to return to the office and explain her behavior, or she would be fired for cause. But Megan wasn't ready to go back. Not yet. She needed more time to gather evidence, to build a solid case against the fraudulent site selection. Julia tried to protect her as best she could, but the pressure was mounting. And then something happened that no one expected. One night, as Megan was walking back from Mrs. Martha's house to the inn, an unfamiliar car was parked in front of Miller's garage. A black sedan with tinted windows, completely out of place on that simple street. Megan felt a tightness in her chest. Something was wrong. She approached cautiously and saw through the garage window a woman talking to Rob. An elegant, middle-aged woman with expensive clothes and a posture that exuded authority. Rob looked tense, and Becca was standing in the corner, arms crossed, her face a mask of anger and pain. Megan couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language told a clear story. That woman was not welcome there. And then Becca shouted something, her voice cutting through the closed window. "You have no right to show up here after all these years. You abandoned us." The woman tried to approach, but Becca recoiled. Rob intervened, placing himself between them. His voice was low, controlled, but there was a tension in it that Megan could feel even from outside. "Felicia, you need to leave. You made your choice a long time ago. You can't just come back and expect everything to be the same." Felicia, the wife who had left, the mother who had abandoned Becca. Megan was paralyzed, unsure whether to go in or give the family their privacy. But the decision was made for her when Becca ran out of the garage, tears streaming down her face. The girl ran right past Megan without seeing her, sprinting up the street. Megan hesitated for only a second before running after her. She found Becca sitting on the curb 3 blocks away, sobbing with her head between her knees. Megan sat beside her in silence, just offering her presence. After a few minutes, Becca spoke, her voice muffled. She came back. After 10 years, she just came back, like nothing happened. Like she didn't leave me wondering every single day what I did wrong to make her go. "You didn't do anything wrong," Megan said softly. "Sometimes people make choices that have nothing to do with us. Sometimes they're fighting battles we can't even understand." "But she's my mother," Becca protested. "She should have stayed. She should have fought for me." "Yes, she should have," Megan agreed. "And the fact that she didn't says a lot about her, not about you. You're incredible. Becca, smart, brave, strong. You became all of that without her, and that's an accomplishment for you and your dad. No one can take that away from you." Becca looked at Megan with red, swollen eyes. "Why are you being so nice to me? You don't even really know me." Megan smiled sadly. "Because I see in you everything I wish I had been at your age. Brave enough to question, to fight for what's right, to not accept injustice just because it's easier. I spent years of my life doing what I was told, believing that success meant climbing the ladder, making more money, impressing my father. And in the end, I was empty. You at 16 already understand things it took me decades to learn." The two sat there for a while in sympathetic silence. Then Becca stood up, wiped her tears, and looked at Megan with renewed determination. "Let's go back. I need to know what she wants. And I need to make it clear that she can't just show up and expect everything to go back to normal." When they returned to the garage, Felicia was still there, talking in a low tone with Rob. She looked at Becca with an expression of pain and regret. "Becca, I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but I need you to listen to me." Becca crossed her arms. "So, talk." Felicia took a deep breath. "I made a mistake, the biggest mistake of my life. I thought I needed more, that this town was too small, that I would suffocate here. So I left, and I've regretted it every single day since. But I was too proud to come back, too afraid of not being forgiven. And now," she paused, "now I need your help." Rob narrowed his eyes. "Help? What kind of help?" Felicia looked ashamed, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her expensive purse like a shield. There were lines on her face that hadn't been there when she left, marks of a decade of choices and regrets. "I got a job opportunity, a great opportunity, the best of my career actually. Regional manager for a multinational tech company. Excellent salary, benefits, room for growth. It was everything I always wanted, everything I left to find. But they're very traditional in their hiring. They want someone stable, with a structured family, with deep roots. Family values are part of their culture, and I, in the interview, desperate to make a good impression, said I had exactly that. I said I'd been married for 20 years, that I had a teenage daughter, that I lived a quiet life in a small town with my close-knit, happy family. They loved that story. They told me I was exactly the profile they were looking for. But now they want to meet you in person. They want to come here, have dinner with us, see with their own eyes that I am who I say I am. They want to make sure I didn't lie on my resume." "You lied to them?" Becca asked, incredulous, her voice rising an octave with growing indignation. "And now you want us to be your actors, pretending we're a happy, perfect family? You want us to put on an elaborate play for your potential bosses?" Felicia looked down, unable to meet the accusing gaze of the daughter she had abandoned. "I know how it sounds. I know perfectly well that it's wrong, unethical even. But I'm desperate. You have to understand, this opportunity could really change my life completely. And maybe," she looked at Becca with a fragile, almost pathetic hope, "maybe it's a real chance for me to prove that I've truly changed, that I genuinely deserve a second chance with you." The silence in the garage was heavy. Rob looked at his ex-wife with a mixture of anger, pity, and something that might have been an old memory of love. Becca looked at her mother as if she were seeing a stranger, and Megan, watching from the outside, realized that this family was about to face a choice that would define not only their future, but who they really were. The tension in the garage was palpable. Felicia waited for an answer, her eyes shifting between Rob and Becca with a mix of hope and fear. Rob ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Megan had learned to recognize as a sign of deep distress. Becca remained still, her face an emotional mask. Megan knew she shouldn't be there, that this was a private moment, but her feet felt glued to the floor. Finally, it was Becca who broke the silence. "You want me to pretend you're my mother, that you've been here all along, that you didn't abandon me when I was 6, and leave my dad to raise a daughter alone while he worked day and night to put food on the table?" Felicia flinched at the rawness of the words, but didn't deny them. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "I know I have no right to ask." "You don't," Rob agreed, his voice deep and heavy with years of unresolved hurt. "But Becca does. She has the right to decide if she wants to do this, not for you, but for herself." All eyes turned to the teenager. Becca looked at her father, confused. "Why would I do that? Why would I help her after everything?" Rob moved closer to his daughter and placed his hands on her shoulders. "Because you're not her, Becca. You're better. You have the chance to choose who you want to be. You can choose to be bitter, to hold a grudge, to make her pay for what she did, and no one would blame you. Or you can choose to be bigger than the pain. You can choose to show that you're capable of compassion even when it's not easy. Not for her, for you. To prove to yourself that you're in charge of your own path." Becca felt the tears return, but this time she didn't try to hide them. "And you, Dad? Can you do it? Can you pretend for one day that she's still part of our lives?" Rob looked at Felicia, and in that gaze there was so much. Years of love, years of pain, years of loneliness, years of sleepless nights, wondering if he'd made the right choice, if he was being enough of a father and mother, if Becca was missing something he couldn't give her. "I can do anything for you. Becca, if you decide you want to do this, I'll be right by your side." Becca wiped her tears and looked at her mother. "I'll do it. But on one condition. You'll tell me the truth about why you left, where you've been all these years, about everything. No lies, no excuses, the whole truth. And after your business visit is over, you'll leave. And this time, you don't come back unless you're ready to be a real part of my life. Not when it's convenient, not when you need something, but for real." Felicia nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I promise. Thank you, Becca. Thank you for being a much better person than I ever was." Megan watched the scene with a heavy heart. There was a profound lesson there about forgiveness, about growth, about choosing who you want to be, regardless of what's been done to you. And she realized she needed to apply that same lesson to her own life. She needed to choose who she wanted to be, no matter what her father or her company expected of her. That night, Megan went back to the inn and called Julia. "I need you to schedule a meeting with the entire board of directors for 3 days from now in Cedar Springs." Julia was silent for a moment. "Megan, you know your father will try to stop this, right? He's telling everyone you had a nervous breakdown, that you're not fit to make decisions. He's already started the process to have you removed." "Then I'd better act fast," Megan replied, with a determination she didn't know she possessed. "Julia, do you trust me?" "I always have," Julia answered without hesitation. "Then I need you to do one more thing. I need all the documents on the Cedar Springs land deal, contracts, approvals, everything. And I need you to discreetly find out who else in the company knew about the connection between Henry Bishop and the mayor. This could cost you your job, Julia." "I know, but some things are more important than a job. I'll get you what you need." For the next 3 days, Cedar Springs became a hub of frantic activity. Megan, Rob, and Becca worked together, turning the garage into a makeshift headquarters. With the help of the residents, they documented every house that would be affected, every story, every community bond that would be broken. Becca, with her brilliant future engineer mind, helped Megan draft a detailed alternative plan for building the factory on the abandoned industrial site. Mrs. Martha brought food every day. Mr. Jenkins donated coffee and fresh bread. The Oliveira family offered their IT skills to organize the data. The entire community came together, each person contributing what they could. And for the first time in her life, Megan understood what it truly meant to work with people, not just manage resources. During those days, she also got to know Rob better. She discovered he was a widower not because his wife had passed away, but because he had never officially divorced Felicia, holding on to a foolish hope that she might one day return. She discovered he played guitar on lonely nights, that he loved astronomy, and would show Becca the constellations from the garage roof. She discovered he was kind, patient, and had a dry sense of humor that made her laugh even in the most tense moments. And she discovered she was falling for him, for this simple man who lived an authentic life far from corporate falsehoods. Rob also began to see Megan in a new light, no longer as the cold executive who had come to destroy his home, but as a woman who had the courage to admit her mistake and fight to fix it. A woman who wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty, to sit on the garage floor surrounded by papers and maps, to drink reheated coffee from old mugs. A woman who listened to his stories and truly understood, who joked with Becca and treated her not as a child, but as an equal. A woman who, for the first time in years, made his heart consider the possibility of trusting again. When the day of the meeting arrived, a van with the Foster Development logo parked in front of Miller's garage. Edward Foster got out first, followed by Henry Bishop and 3 other directors. Edward was an imposing man, nearly 70, with perfectly coiffed grey hair and a suit that cost more than Rob's truck. His face was a mask of controlled rage when he saw his daughter. "Megan, what the hell do you think you're doing?" he asked, his voice sharp. "You made me come to this godforsaken place for what? To embarrass me? To destroy your own career?" Megan stood her ground. "I came to show you the truth, to show you what the reports don't tell, to show you what it really means to build on top of people's lives, and to expose the fraud behind the selection of this site." Henry Bishop turned pale. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything," Megan replied, her voice calm but firm. "I'm stating it. You chose this site, not for technical feasibility, but because your cousin is the mayor of this town. Because you two cooked up a scheme to profit from the displacement of 32 families? And I have the proof." She opened her laptop and showed them the documents Julia had obtained. The dates didn't lie. The ordinance changing the land use had been signed 3 days after a private meeting between Henry and the mayor. A meeting that wasn't on either of their official schedules, but had been recorded at a restaurant where they had lunch together. The lunch expenses, ironically, had been paid with a company credit card. The other directors began to murmur among themselves. Edward Foster looked at Henry with an expression that mixed anger and disappointment. But Megan wasn't finished. She presented the alternative plan she had developed with Becca. She showed how the abandoned industrial site was not only viable, but better. More room for future expansion, less community resistance, better access for freight transport, and most importantly, 0 families displaced. The additional cost would be 15%, yes, but the long-term benefits far outweighed that investment. And then Becca stepped forward. At just 16, she looked at these powerful men in suits and ties without fear. "You see numbers on a spreadsheet. I see my home. You see a profit opportunity. I see my neighbors, the people, who watched me grow up, who brought food when my dad was sick, who taught me how to ride a bike. Your factory will bring jobs. Great. But why does it have to destroy lives in the process? Why does progress have to mean erasing history?" The silence that followed was absolute. That girl, with her simplicity and truth, had said in a few words what all the corporate reports failed to capture. Edward Foster looked at the mechanic's daughter, then at his own daughter, and something in his face changed. Maybe it was recognition, maybe it was shame, maybe it was, for the first time in decades, a spark of humanity breaking through the corporate armor he had built over the years. He turned to Henry. "You're fired. Effective immediately. And if I find out anyone else in this company was involved in this scheme, they're going with you." Then he looked at Megan. "As for the project," he paused, clearly fighting his own pride, "you're approved to lead the implementation of the alternative plan. Show me you can do it the right way." Megan felt a wave of relief but also surprise. She had expected to be fired, excommunicated, professionally destroyed. But her father, as rigid as he was, still had a code of ethics somewhere inside him. A code that didn't tolerate corruption, even when it came from his closest allies. "Thank you, Dad. But I need to tell you something. I'm not going to lead this project." Edward frowned. "What do you mean?" "Because I resign," Megan said, her voice firm. "I spent years trying to prove I deserve my place in the company, trying to show I'm as good as any man. But in the process, I lost myself. I forgot why I started all this. I forgot that business should serve people, not the other way around. So I'm going to start my own path, a path where I don't have to choose between doing the right thing and keeping my job." Rob stepped forward. "She's going to work with me," he said, surprising even Megan. "We're going to turn the garage into a technical education center, teach the young people here how to work with their hands, to fix, to create, to build. And she, with all her corporate experience, is going to help me structure it. She's going to help bring real opportunities to our town the right way." Megan looked at Rob with gratitude and something more, something warm, deep, scary, and wonderful all at once. Becca smiled, and Megan realized the girl had figured out what was happening between her and her dad long before they had. Edward Foster watched the scene, the daughter he had tried to mold in his own image finally breaking free. Part of him was furious, but another part, a smaller but still present part, was proud. She had found the courage to choose her own path, to challenge everything and everyone for what she believed in. Maybe she was stronger than he had ever been. "If that's what you want," he said finally, "then go. But don't come asking me for help when things get tough." Megan smiled. "I won't have to. I have everything I need right here." The directors left, taking Henry Bishop with them, who would be formally investigated for conflict of interest. The van disappeared down the dirt road, leaving a cloud of red dust that gradually settled. Rob, Megan, and Becca stood there in front of the garage, looking toward the future they had built together. Days later, when the dust had literally settled and things began to stabilize, Megan received a call from Julia. She had been promoted to project manager, taking the position Megan had left vacant. And she had news. Megan's grandmother, who had passed away years ago, had left a substantial inheritance in her will. But there was a condition. The money could only be accessed when Megan demonstrated true independence from her father's company. The family lawyer deemed that resigning and starting her own project perfectly met that criterion. Megan used part of the money to buy the lot next to the garage and build the technical education center. They called it the Root Center, a place where theory and practice met, where the youth of Cedar Springs could learn real trades and prepare for a future without having to abandon their roots. Becca, despite having earned a full scholarship for engineering in Dallas, decided to defer for a year. She wanted to help structure the center. She wanted to be near her dad. She wanted to be part of that transformation. And maybe, just maybe, she wanted to be around to see what would happen between her father and Megan. As for Felicia, she got the job. The executive's visit to the supposedly happy family in Cedar Springs was a success, thanks to everyone's convincing performance. But when it was all over and she was preparing to leave, Becca stopped her at the door. "Can you call sometimes? It doesn't have to be all the time. You don't have to pretend everything's okay between us. But I'd like to know how you are, to have a chance to know who you really are now." Felicia hugged her daughter, tears streaming down her face. "I'll call, I promise, and this time I'll keep it, miss." And time passed. Summer gave way to fall and fall to winter. The Root Center opened its doors with 15 students. Rob discovered he had a talent for teaching, that his patience and practical skills were exactly what those young people needed. Megan discovered that managing a community project was infinitely more rewarding than managing corporate spreadsheets. And between equipment repairs, applied math lessons, and reheated coffee, she and Rob discovered that love didn't have a right age, a right time, or a right place. It just happened when two people allowed themselves to be vulnerable, authentic, real. One night, after everyone had gone home and the center was quiet, Rob found Megan organizing tools in the garage. She still wore heels sometimes, but now paired with jeans and a simple shirt. Her hair was no longer perfectly styled, and there was a smudge of grease on her cheek. She had never looked more beautiful. "You know I've fallen in love with you, don't you?" he said suddenly, without beating around the bush. Megan turned, her heart racing. "I was waiting for you to notice." Rob smiled that half smile she had grown to love. "And you? Are you going to make Faye wait much longer?" Megan dropped the tool and walked over to him. "No, I think we've both waited long enough for the right things." The kiss they shared there, surrounded by tools and dreams they had built together, was confirmation that sometimes the right path is the one you didn't plan. It's the one that appears when a motorcycle breaks down on a dirt road, when you miss an important meeting, when you choose people over profits. It's the path that builds bridges instead of walls, that unites instead of divides, that plants roots instead of tearing them out. Becca, who had come back to grab a forgotten book, saw the scene through the window and smiled. She sent a text to Felicia. "I think Dad is happy again, and so am I. Thanks for teaching me, even without meaning to, that we always have a choice about who we become." The reply came minutes later. "You are wiser than I ever was. Take care of him, and let him take care of you, and never, ever forget that you are amazing just as you are." Becca put her phone away and looked out at the town she loved, at the center she had helped build, at the future that lay open before her, full of possibilities. And she thought that maybe, just maybe, the best stories were the ones that started with a setback, with a plan that went wrong, with an unexpected encounter on a dusty road, because those were the stories that forced us to grow, to choose, to become who we were truly meant to be. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Megan, Rob, and Becca has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of courage, sacrifice, and true love, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which part resonated with you the most. Was it Megan's transformation, Becca's strength, Rob's patience, or the forgiveness that healed old wounds? Every day, we bring you intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul, making us question our own choices, and inspiring us to be better versions of ourselves. We'll see you in the next episode, with a new story that will stir your emotions and make you reflect on what truly matters in life.